Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to hop in on the old energy bandwagon here. This isn't a mystery to me why we're not creating jobs, why our economy isn't growing. I mean, when you take, as a business person, I was actually making those investment decisions for 31 years. You take a look at our regulatory environment. I mean, you want an answer why we can't build a Pentagon in 9 months? Because all the regulations. Try and build something in this country. You think we could do the Hoover Dam again? You know, why did President Obama kick the can down the road on the Keystone XL pipeline? Why aren't we drilling in Anwar? Government regulation, we're killing ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves. So I guess when I take a look at your testimony, with all due respect, I couldn't disagree more with your conclusions. My own experience, again, in making those investment decisions, if you allow business owners to keep more money, they will invest it. Recent history in terms of short-term stimulus. I mean, isn't it true that basically what happened with a lot of those stimulus dollars is consumers, because of their fear, basically just deleveraged? Didn't really stimulate the economy. I mean, isn't that by and large correct?
So we expected that some of that money would be saved. It's hard to know, in retrospect, exactly what happened in that episode because we can't track those particular dollars through particular households.
But we can see that we already did a payroll tax holiday. We've extended unemployment benefits, and it hasn't worked. All we've done is we've incurred additional $4 trillion worth of debt, another $1 trillion coming on board this year. And what's really preventing businesses from investing is the fear that, you know, the end result of all those debt and deficits. I mean, when government spends more money than it has, we know as business people that eventually government's going to take. They're going to tax you more, or they're going to create inflation, and that's why the business community is simply not investing. I mean, don't you basically agree with that conclusion?
So, Senator, we believe and have written and write in this testimony that uncertainty about future government policies, future tax and spending policies, future regulatory policies are a factor that is restraining businesses' decisions to invest and hire and households' decisions to spend. But we don't think that's the principal factor. And for example, surveys of small business people done by the National Federation of Independent Business shows that the main difference in the obstacles that businesses report themselves facing today relative to a few years ago is a weakness in demand for their products.
Because everybody is afraid of a European contagion, that the exact same thing is going to happen in the United States as is happening in Greece, in Italy. They're afraid of that. And so, again, what I want to concentrate on is the debt and deficit. And I want to talk about the real risks, you know, that I don't think that we are really acknowledging now in this country. I mean, let's first start out by not achieving the growth targets that CBO estimates. And I have no idea how you come up with your estimates. You know, I'm assuming in this analysis you used similar estimates that said you were going to grow at 3.1% this year, and we're not going to achieve that growth. And I think your estimate is for every 0.1% reduction in growth, we add $310 billion to 10-year.
That sounds right, yes, Senator.
So if it's only 1% less, that's $3.1 trillion in additional deficits over 10 years, correct?
Yes.
I've seen other studies, if we only grow at 2.5% in the next 10 years, that will add $5 trillion to our debt and deficit. That's a significant risk, correct?
Oh, yes, no doubt. I mean, and you can see in the pictures we showed today, we have very wide bands or estimates for each of these policies because we recognize the uncertainty of the analysis that we're doing.
Not a whole lot of people are talking about that very significant risk. Why is that? Are we just afraid to acknowledge it because all we're doing in the super committee is trying to come up with $1.2 trillion in the reduction in the rate of growth in spending?
So I guess, Senator, from my perspective, people are talking about that risk. They have not reached agreement in the super committee, as far as I know, and so and the Congress has not enacted some legislation to reduce deficits by more than was done in the Budget Control Act over the summer. My sense, actually, is that people are talking about it a lot, but that agreement on how to address it remains elusive.
Well, people are certainly fearing it. Let me go to another area of significant risk, and this is exactly, you know, going into CBO projections, which I just think are totally wrong when it comes to the Health Care Act. According to CBO, only 3.6 million people were estimated to lose their employer-sponsored care and get dumped in the exchanges. How did you ever come up with 3.6 million people? What economic model came up with that number?
So our model takes account of incentives facing households and businesses to get insurance coverage through various possible avenues. And other people who built models of the health insurance market have actually reached rather similar conclusions to ours about the effects of the health legislation. That includes the actuaries at CMS, researchers at the Urban Institute, at RAND, and other places. And it does surprise many people that we don't show a larger loss of employer-sponsored insurance coverage. I think it's worth remembering here that most people now receive and will continue to receive significant subsidy to buy health insurance through their employer through the tax code.
Let me just stop you. Have you seen your predecessor, Douglas Holtz-Aiken's decision matrix, which just proves conclusively that economically it is in the employer's and the employee's best interest for 35 million people to get dumped off their employer-sponsored care and get put in the exchanges? Have you seen that study?
So we've seen his analysis, but we reach a very different conclusion. And as I was saying, for most workers, they would get no or smaller subsidies through the new insurance exchanges than they receive through the tax code. They don't have an incentive to go to the exchanges.
His analysis would have increased our deficit in the first 10 years by over $500 billion. In the second 10 years, $1.4 trillion. When I saw that decision matrix as somebody who'd bought health insurance for 31 years, I called him up and I said, Doug, this is pretty good analysis, but you're still wrong. Because let me run through what the real decision factor is going to be. As an employer, and again, somebody who's been buying health care for years, according to the CBO in 2016, the average cost of family coverage will be $15,000, which, by the way, is $2,100 more expensive than it would have been had we not passed a health care law. Let's put that aside. $15,000. So an employer now is going to be taking a look at, well, I could pay $15,000, or I could pay a $2,000 penalty. And with the Health Care Act, I'm no longer throwing my employees to the wolves. I'm making them eligible for very large subsidies. In the case of somebody making $64,000 a year, which is, by the way, $13,000 more than the median income, that's a $10,000 subsidy. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've had a McKinsey study that showed 50% of employers that are informed are planning on dropping coverage very shortly after this Health Care Act takes effect. When that happens, you have, if that's half, 180 million people get their insurance through the employer-sponsored care. Half of them would be 90 million people at about $4,000 subsidy. That costs us close to over $400 billion a year as opposed to the $95 billion. Isn't that pretty accurate?
So, Senator, you're right that employers who put their workers into the insurance exchanges would not be throwing them to the wolves in the same sense they would be without such exchanges in place. Nonetheless, their employees would then be foregoing a very large tax subsidy. And a majority of people, of workers, who would have employer-sponsored health insurance without that law would be eligible for no subsidy through the insurance exchanges. And they get a substantial subsidy through the tax code. So there's no reason for the firm to put them into the exchange. That is against the interests of the workers.
No, but it's in the interest of the employer. Okay, and again, the decision is $15,000 or pay $2,000 and make my employee eligible for a $10,000 subsidy. And again, the surveys show employers that are informed, 50% right now are saying they're going to drop coverage. How can you continue to deny that? And by the way, as a result, totally understate what our true risk of debt and deficit are 10 years in, going out 10 years. We are really misleading the American people on this factor.
So I have to disagree with you, Senator. I don't think we're misleading the American people. There's a great deal of uncertainty around our estimates, and we've said that every time we've talked about them, I think. It is not true that for most workers, they're eligible for substantial subsidies through the insurance exchanges.
Your own CBO spreadsheet showed that the average cost of subsidy in 2021 will be $7,000. Of those 3.6 million people, the average
for people who are eligible
for
subsidies,
$7,000. Yes. But again, the eligibility is, well, we can go.
Those who are eligible are a minority of workers. And we've read that survey. We've read other surveys that have reached different conclusions. For what it's worth, when CBO estimated the effects of adding the prescription drug benefit to Medicare a number of years ago, we had to make an assessment about how many employers would stop providing drug coverage to their retirees and have their retirees only get drug coverage through Medicare. The number, and shortly after we did the estimate, There were surveys in which a lot more employers said they would drop coverage than we'd estimated. But in fact, at the end of the day, fewer employers dropped coverage than CBO estimated.
So just my final question.
Surveys are not always a good predictor.
I understand, but in light of these surveys that say 50%, that's 90 million people. 50%, and you're going to stick to your 3.6 million estimate? You think that's a good estimate?
Senator, we're always evaluating our estimates and taking on board new information. In fact, we talked today already about revisions that we made to our estimates of the effects of the sort of fiscal policies we were talking about today. So we are not averse to changing our estimates when there is new evidence. And if there is new evidence that we find compelling, then we'll make a change.
I'd ask you to review that evidence, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, I think it was, look, I think it was a valuable exchange. And we need it. The country needs it. We got to be, it's important to have this debate.